In the 1950s, there's a place called Victory near the California desert. It's a company town where families seem to live perfect lives. Every day, husbands go to work at Victory headquarters, while housewives take care of their homes and attend ballet lessons with their teacher, Shelley. Wives aren't allowed to question their husband's work or visit the headquarters. Alice and Jack are one of the happy couples in Victory. They have a great social life and share intimate moments. They often throw parties for their neighbors, especially Alice's close friend Bunny and her husband. Alice loves humming her favorite song while doing her chores. Sometimes the town experiences small earthquakes, but Jack doesn't say much about any connection to Victory's projects, and Alice doesn't ask too many questions. After ballet class one day, Alice and Bunny gossip about their friend Margaret, who has become an outcast after a strange incident. Later, Alice sees Margaret in her backyard, seemingly fascinated by a toy plane and talking about weird visions. Alice doesn't know what to think, so she ignores her. During dinner preparation, Alice finds all her eggs empty but gets distracted when her meal starts to burn. At a pool party hosted by Shelley, Bunny gets annoyed with Alice's constant humming. Alice realizes she doesn't recognize the song stuck in her head, yet it's always been there. Strange images come with the melody, but she pushes them aside. The party pauses briefly when Shelley and her husband Frank, the CEO of Victory, give a speech to the new neighbors. Margaret interrupts, questioning their presence, but her husband quickly removes her. Frank tries to ease the tension by talking about Victory's mission, but Alice is worried about Margaret. She finds Margaret being medicated by her husband and learns about her distressing dreams. Margaret thinks they're hiding something from her, but her husband stops Alice from finding out more. Returning to the party, Alice finds Jack in Frank's room, where they become intimate. But things get uncomfortable when Frank silently watches them before leaving. Alice decides not to tell Jack about it. The next day, while shopping with her friends, they talk about Margaret's strange behavior since her ordeal. Bunny reveals that Margaret broke a rule and went into the desert with her child, possibly because of a hallucination. Despite Margaret's claim that her child was taken as punishment, they never found him. Their conversation is interrupted by another earthquake, which they ignore out of habit. Alice speculates about rumors she's heard regarding the men developing weapons, but Bunny interrupts angrily, saying the wives' only job is to support their husbands and not question them. That night, Alice has bizarre dreams that linger into the next day. Seeking solace, she takes the trolley for some fresh air but remains captivated by the view of the desert, much to the driver's surprise. Suddenly, a plane that looks like Margaret's toy crashes in the desert. Despite Alice's concern for potential survivors, the driver refuses to change the route, sticking to the rules. Alice ventures into the desert alone and finds a hill with a spiral road leading to a mysterious dome. She calls for help, but no one answers. Bravely, she approaches the dome, touching its walls and triggering a disorienting experience filled with unsettling images and Frank's voice discussing chaos. Awakening back in her bed, Alice finds Jack cooking in the kitchen. Confused about her return and mentioning the plane crash, Jack assures her it didn't happen. Alice brushes it off as a bad dream, comforted by Jack's gestures and humor. The following day, while cleaning the windows, Alice is startled as the wall behind her moves, pinning her against the glass. Terrified, Alice pushes against the wall, but it returns to normal in an instant, realizing it was a hallucination. The phone rings, and Margaret voices her concerns about the town's deceit, urging Alice to leave. But Alice dismisses her, asserting her sanity before hanging up. Despite her efforts to shake off the conversation, it haunts Alice, culminating in a disturbing experience during ballet class. She sees her reflection transform into Margaret, initially mimicking Alice's movements. Suddenly, Margaret starts hitting her head against the glass, causing Alice to scream in panic. No one else notices, and when Alice looks again, Margaret is gone. Concerned, Alice rushes home to find Margaret perched on top of her house. Desperate to intervene, Alice pleads with Margaret, who disregards her and jumps, leaving Alice in shock. Attempting to reach Margaret, Alice is stopped by men in red jumpsuits who forcibly remove her. That evening, Alice confides in Jack, but he dismisses her concerns, citing Margaret's husband's reassurances that it was an accident. Feeling dismissed and desperate for answers, Alice confronts Jack about his job and the company's secrets, leading to a heated exchange where Jack implores her to drop the subject. Alone and disturbed, Alice tries to distract herself by watching TV, only to experience a new hallucination of drowning in a pool, feeling disoriented. Alice finds herself standing against the window, feeling like she had tried to leave, just like the wall trapping her. The next morning, while wrapping leftovers, Alice's hands move on their own, wrapping part of her body before she snaps out of it, realizing she's losing control. Alice struggles to understand her state of mind. Shortly after, Jack brings Dr. Collins for a checkup. Collins thinks Alice's behavior is due to stress from seeing Margaret's fall and suggests medication, which Jack and Alice refuse. Alice is curious about Collins's classified files on Margaret. She questions him and learns that Margaret's paranoia disrupted her husband's work at Victory, leading to his firing and Margaret's move for treatment. After Collins and Jack leave, Alice tries to snoop in the briefcase but is interrupted by Collins's return. She pretends to get the briefcase for him, hiding her snooping. Later, Alice finds Margaret's files heavily redacted and decides to burn them in the fireplace. She thinks about Margaret's fate, drowning her sorrows in whiskey to numb her guilt. While drinking, Alice's mind wanders during her bath, revisiting disturbing images and fleeting moments of a loving couple. She snaps back to reality when Jack comes home playing music. Surprised, Jack brings up the topic of having a baby, and overwhelmed, Alice agrees to consider it. Later that evening, they attend a party hosted by Frank at a restaurant. Alice feels uneasy as Frank's gaze follows her, especially when he talks with Collins. On the verge of a breakdown, Alice is further distressed by a dancer's performance triggering memories. Tearful, she asks Jack to leave, but he's focused on the festivities, announcing his promotion. Overwhelmed, Alice retreats to the bathroom, where the vision of the couple reappears. Bunny interrupts, scolding Alice for disrupting the event and reminding her of her role as a supportive wife. Alice suppresses her turmoil and resumes her routine. Days later, Jack hosts a dinner party with Frank and Shelley attending. While Alice cooks, Frank expresses fascination with her and desires her to challenge him in the future. During dinner, Alice deliberately takes the head of the table, probing guests about their past and Victory. Despite Jack's attempts to intervene, Alice exposes Frank's deception, leading to a tense atmosphere. Shelley admonishes Alice, and the guests storm out, followed by Frank. Alice is seething when Jack returns, accusing her of ruining the evening. She denies it, prioritizing their relationship over Victory. After pleading, Jack agrees to escape together. As they hastily pack, Jack surprises Alice by apologizing unexpectedly, signaling a shift in their dynamic. Alice's confusion intensifies as men in red forcibly remove her, leaving Jack distraught as he hears her cries, taken to the hospital for electroshock therapy. Alice endures a lot of pain while having visions of a life with Jack where she works as a doctor to support them both. But the strain of working long hours, along with Jack's lack of support and his expectations for intimacy, makes things harder for her. Meanwhile, Jack finds comfort in Frank's podcast, which talks about living differently from what society expects. Eventually, Alice wakes up in the hospital in Victory, declared fixed by Collins, and returns to her old routine without remembering what happened to her. Days pass peacefully until Jack, seemingly unaware of Alice's struggles, comes home singing the familiar song. It's then revealed that the modern-day Jack from Alice's visions is real and has joined the Victory Project, giving him access to a machine that simulates their ideal life. Alice is unwittingly connected to it 24/7. As the truth unfolds, Alice learns that all the wives in Victory are connected to similar simulation machines, with their husbands controlling their experiences for a few hours each day. Outside of the simulation, Jack tends to Alice's real body and works to afford the upkeep of the machine. Overwhelmed by this revelation and the flood of images in her mind, Alice confronts Jack. He defends his actions, saying he did it for their happiness. But Alice sees through his manipulation and resents him for taking away her autonomy and gaslighting her. Jack admits that even their children in the simulation aren't real. Filled with anger and betrayal, Alice strikes Jack with a glass, unaware that dying in the simulation results in real-life death. As Jack succumbs, Frank receives news of the incident. Bunny arrives, revealing her own participation in the simulation to cope with the loss of her children. She urges Alice to disconnect herself at the headquarters, as Jack can no longer do it for her. Despite her fear, Alice complies, discovering that her neighbors are also awakening from the simulation. Chaos ensues, with exploding street lights, as the women realize the truth while the men focus on stopping Alice and inquire about Jack's fate. Bunny helps Alice escape in a car just before the men in red pursue her in a high-speed chase through the streets. Alice encounters trouble in the desert as the men relentlessly ram her car. Dr. Collins joins the pursuit but ends up colliding with the others, resulting in his demise. Meanwhile, Frank receives news of Collins' death, leading Shelley to take matters into her own hands by fatally stabbing Frank at home. In the desert, Alice's car gets stuck on a sharp turn, but determined, she continues on foot. The men in red abandon their vehicles and give chase on foot, forcing Alice to push herself to her limits to reach the dome atop the hill. Despite exhaustion and hallucinations of Jack urging her to stay, Alice reaches the dome and places her hands on the glass, triggering a flood of disturbing images mixed with snippets of her real memories. As everything fades to black, Alice gasps, signaling a pivotal moment in her journey.